Somewhere in West Virginia, there is a town you have driven within a few miles of and never once suspected was there. A place where families raised children, buried their parents, and expected to stay for generations, right up until the thing that built it packed up and took the reason to live there along with it. This state is full of them. Here are 10 abandoned places in West Virginia. I'm willing to bet you don't know, and number 1 will stay with you. Number 10, Sewell in Fayette County. Nobody was driven out of Sewell. No disaster emptied it. The final resident simply closed the door behind him in 1973 and walked away, because by then there was nothing left worth staying for. And that ordinary, unspectacular ending is exactly why the place is worth talking about. Sewell rose along the New River in the closing decades of the 1800s for a single industrial purpose, and that purpose was coke, the nearly pure carbon fuel you get by baking coal in sealed stone ovens until every impurity burns off, hot enough to melt iron into steel. American steel could not have been made without it, and Sewell was one of dozens of little West Virginia settlements that existed purely to feed that appetite. Everything in town orbited the ovens and the mines that supplied them. Company row houses stepped up the hillside, and a miner would run a tab at the store for his groceries and boots and tools, then settle it on payday. At the end of a shift, the hollow filled with life again, children loose in the road, women out among the gardens, men on their porches with coal smoke still clinging to them. It was a hard way to live, and a complete one. Then steelmaking modernized, and the newer methods left small coke works like this one with no reason to exist. Production tapered off, the company stopped putting money in, and one household after another packed up until that last man locked up and left in 1973. The land belongs to Babcock State Park now. Search the woods carefully and you will find the original coke ovens still there. Enormous brick chambers split apart by a century of frost and rain, trees pushing straight up through the middle of them. Hikers pass within arm's reach and never realize what they are looking at. Number 9, Volcano in Wood County. Before the great strikes in Texas, before anyone was drilling in Oklahoma, one of the first oil rushes this country ever saw broke out in the hills of West Virginia, and for a short while, the town at the center of it had every reason to think it stood at the start of something enormous. It did not. Volcano sat in Wood County, and by the middle of the 19th century, it ranked among the earliest commercial oil towns anywhere in America. Once the wells came in, the money arrived right behind them. There was a hotel, a post office, restaurants, a meat market, a pumping station. Businessmen turned up, families put down roots, working men drew steady pay, and the streets carried that charge you feel when a whole population believes its town is on the way up. What almost none of them could see was that the real weight of the industry was already sliding north toward the richer ground in Pennsylvania, and the serious money was following it out the door before anything dramatic ever happened. Then, in January of 1879, fire swept the business district. Kennedy's restaurant went up, so did the Nicolai Hotel, the post office, the meat market, the pumping station, all of it burned. The oil companies still holding on had no reason to raise a town they were halfway out of already, so they gathered their things and left, and Volcano went silent for good. A modest museum and gift shop stand on the ground today. For a place that belonged to America's very first oil boom, one that arguably earned a roadside marker and a paragraph in the school books, that is the whole of what survives. Number 8, Nuttallburg in Fayette County. You cannot drive to this one. The only way down is on your own 2 feet, more than 800 steps carved straight into the wall of the New River Gorge, and at the bottom you come upon machinery so massive and so undisturbed that the place reads less like a ruin and more like a work site. Somebody padlocked one afternoon and never reopened. John Nuttall drove his claim into the coal here in the early years of the century, and the near vertical gorge forced a strange kind of engineering on him. To get the coal out, he had a colossal iron tipple bolted into the cliff face, a conveyor running down beside it, built to pour coal straight into C&O railroad cars idling at the bottom. Once that line pushed through in 1873, Nuttallburg turned into one of the busiest coal shipping outfits in the entire gorge. Families built their lives in that hollow, with a store, a school, and the tight, interdependent kind of community that only forms where every household's survival rests on the exact same thing. By 1958, the reachable coal had thinned out, and the railroad contracts that had justified the whole enterprise thinned out along with it. The company wound down, and the families who had made a home in that gorge carried up what they could and climbed those stairs a final time. The iron tipple is still bolted to the cliff. 40 coke ovens sit half-hidden in the brush. The old track vanishes into the greenery, and the safety notices the company once posted, the warnings about gas and ventilation and correct procedure, are still fixed to the walls precisely where they hung the day the last man clocked out. Nobody ever went back to pull them down, and more than 60 years on, they are hanging there yet. Number 7. Thurmond in Fayette County. In 1910, this town was pulling in more railroad freight money than Cincinnati and Richmond put together. 2 banks, a pair of hotels, a jeweler, a picture house, restaurants, and a card game that supposedly never once broke for 14 straight years. 5 people live there now, and the thing that ruined it is not the thing you would guess. Captain W.D. Thurmond was handed 73 acres along the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway in 1873 as his fee for survey work. When the C&O ran its main line through the New River Gorge, that narrow ribbon of land became the hub where coal trains gathered in from dozens of surrounding mines and were sent off east, and the sums crossing it were extraordinary for a town that barely registered on any map. In its first years, Thurmond had no road at all. Rail was the only way in and out, and the commercial buildings pressed right up to the tracks with no street between them. The captain forbade alcohol on his land, so directly across the water, the Dunglen Hotel operated under no such rule and earned its fame from that poker table said to have run without a break for 14 years running. Now here is what genuinely finished the town. Every last piece of its infrastructure, the water towers, the coaling stations, the engine house, the whole sprawling yard, had been built for one job: keeping steam locomotives running. A steam engine had to halt every 100 miles or so to take on coal and water, and Thurmond was where it halted. Then, across the late 1940s and into the 1950s, the railroad switched to diesel, and a diesel engine could run for hundreds of miles between stops. In a single technological blink, Thurmond had nothing anyone needed. The hotels lost their guests, the banks lost their business, and the families lost any reason to remain. The National Park Service holds most of the town today, and the old depot serves as a visitor center. Amtrak calls 3 times a week, though fewer than 400 people a year actually step off, and 5 residents are on the books. The streets that once handled 95,000 passengers in a day are quiet enough now that you can stand in the middle of them and hear nothing but the river. Number 6. Kaymoor in Fayette County. To reach this place, you climb down 821 stairs into the New River Gorge, and most people who grew up in this state have never so much as heard the name. When you finally arrive at the bottom, what you find does not look abandoned so much as interrupted, as though the whole workforce set down its tools one afternoon and never came back for them. Kaymoor opened in 1899. Across the years between 1900 and 1962, the men here brought more than 16 million tons of coal out of that one mountain. Every ton of it was cut by hand by men who lived with their families in company houses stacked directly above the mine, who sent their kids to the company school and prayed in the company church and went back underground every morning, knowing full well that a fall of rock or a pocket of gas could finish them without a moment's notice. In 1960, a bad fire ran through the town. The site was too remote and too damaged to be worth rebuilding, so the company sealed the mine 2 years later, and the families who had spent generations in that gorge had no option but to go. The forest came back in a hurry and has been swallowing the site ever since. Equipment stands right where it last ran, and the mine buildings lean at a sharper angle with every passing winter. Of everything down in that gorge, it is the emergency notices still pinned to the walls that land hardest, written for men long gone and left hanging in the quiet. Number 5. Bramwell in Mercer County. Tell someone that a small town tucked into the Appalachian Mountains once held more millionaires for its size than any other place in the United States, and the first thing they will want to know is what such a town looks like now. The answer's not the one they are bracing for. At the dawn of the 20th century, Bramwell had more millionaires per head than anywhere else in the country. And I mean the country, not the state. Coal made it possible. When the Pocahontas seam was struck in Mercer County in the 1880s, it ran 10 feet thick in spots and stretched 48 miles, and it burned so clean that the trade sold it as smokeless coal. The Norfolk and Western stopped in Bramwell 14 times a day, and the men who ran the mining operations put their own houses up right here along the Bluestone River, while thousands of miners worked the seams a few miles off. What they built has no equal anywhere in Appalachia. A 24-room mansion, topped with a copper roof and fitted with an indoor swimming pool. A house raised from orange brick shipped in from England. 17 millionaires living inside a short stroll of one another. The Bank of Bramwell sat on so much money that one of the janitor's regular duties was wheeling a barrow of cash down the street to the depot, and that same bank sold more First World War bonds than any other financial house in the nation. October of 1929 brought it all down. The crash hollowed out most of those fortunes within a few years. The bank went under, coal demand cratered along with the wider economy, and the railroad drew back. The millionaires who had not already gone lost whatever was left. The dinner parties, the guests coming down from New York, the ballrooms, every bit of it stopped and never resumed. What sets Bramwell apart from everything else on this list is that the mansions never came down. The town in its entirety was entered on the National Register of Historic Places in 1984. The brick streets remain, and you can walk right up to those houses and stand face to face with what coal money bought. The population sits under 300, and the bank has been closed for the better part of a century, but the homes are still up there on the hillside, and for anyone who comes upon them not knowing what to expect, they are difficult to believe. Number 4. Matewan in Mingo County. On a May afternoon in 1920, a handful of men wrapped up their work in a small West Virginia river town and started toward the depot to catch a train out. They never got there. 10 of them were dead inside of 2 minutes, and what happened in that short, violent span sent a tremor through American history that has not fully settled since. Matewan sat on the Tug Fork in Mingo County, hard against the Kentucky line, a main street and a depot, and a church that could have belonged to any small town in the southern Appalachians. What set it apart was its chief of police. That year, the United Mine Workers of America was pushing hard to bring the Union into the non-Union coal fields of the state's southern counties, and any miner who signed a card understood precisely what he was risking: his job, the company house his family slept in, and quite possibly his life. The Stone Mountain Coal Company brought in the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency to see that the Union got nowhere. Baldwin Felts was no ordinary force of the law. They were hired muscle, and their business was keeping miners in their place. On the 19th of May, 13 of their agents came into Matewan to throw mining families out of company housing, marching women and children into the road at gunpoint and pitching their belongings out after them. With the evictions done and the agents making for the evening train, Police Chief Sid Hatfield stepped into their path. Armed miners had already slipped into position all around the block. It came apart in seconds. Inside 2 minutes, 10 men lay dead, 7 of the detectives, 2 miners, and the town's own mayor. What came afterward grew into the largest armed labor uprising the country has ever seen, when thousands of miners took up rifles the next year and marched in the Battle of Blair Mountain. The coal operators never again held the absolute grip they once had on the southern fields, and the protections that came out of those years, the right to organize, the fight for fair pay, the safeguards on the job, are still carried by working people across the country now. Matewan is nearly empty these days. The depot is a museum, and a flood wall along the tug fork carries painted murals that lay out the whole account. The building that once housed the Baldwin Felts operation still stands on the main street, the bullet holes still in its walls, right where they have been for more than 100 years. Number 3, Coalwood in McDowell County. You may have watched the movie, you may even have read the book it came from, but most people who know Homer Hickam's story have never been shown what Coalwood looks like today, and once they see it, the whole thing settles on them differently. George Lafayette Carter came into McDowell County on the back of a mule in 1905, found rich coal in the mountain, and bought himself 20,000 acres. He sank a mine, and then he built everything a mine needs around it: company houses, a church, a schoolhouse, a store, and he kept a doctor and a dentist on full-time salary. At its height, more than 2,000 people called Coalwood home, and McDowell County became the single highest coal-producing county in the entire country. Most families quietly assumed the mountain would keep them as long as it kept the coal. Then, in the autumn of 1957, the mine superintendent's 14-year-old boy watched Sputnik track across the night sky and decided, then and there, that he would build rockets. In a coal town in one of the poorest counties in America, Homer Hickam and a few friends began firing homemade rockets off a bare stretch of coal waste they christened Cape Coalwood. They failed and failed and failed again before they finally got one to fly. In 1960, they took the National Science Fair. Hickam grew up to be a NASA engineer, and years down the road, he wrote the memoir that became the film October Sky. A miner's son out of one of the hardest corners of the country made it all the way to the space program, and that story has outlived the town that raised him. The mine shut for good in 1986, and by 1990, the population had slipped under 900. The tipple is gone now. The company store is barely something you would recognize, and the houses are slipping back into the hillside one at a time. The place that launched a boy toward NASA is being quietly handed back to the mountain, and most of the people who love that movie have no idea the town it was set in has all but disappeared. Number 2, Gary in McDowell County. When U.S. Steel came into McDowell County in 1902, it did not build a mine. It built an entire world, 12 towns, 15,000 people, schools and churches, a golf course, a bowling alley, a movie house, a country club. 8 decades later, it shut the whole thing down inside of a single year and walked off. Gary was the crown of U.S. Steel's Appalachian coal empire. The company took in better than 50,000 acres along the Tug Fork and raised 12 linked company towns tied together by paved roads and rail spurs and named after its founding chairman, Elbert Henry Gary, the very man whose name is also on Gary, Indiana. At its peak in the 1940s, Gary Hollow held close to 15,000 people, 27 churches, 10 company stores, 9 elementary schools, 2 high schools, a bowling alley, a dairy, a bakery, a pool hall, a country club, and a golf course. Its workforce was among the genuinely diverse communities anywhere in the region, miners drawn from Hungary, Romania, Italy, and Poland, and from all across the American South, black and white men working side by side and, by the 1950s, sending their children into the same classrooms. When the U.S. Coal Commission looked Gary over in 1923, it handed the place a score of 90 out of 100 for cleanliness and safety and community life, and called it a model for how a company town ought to be run. And then the coal gave out. The deepest and finest seams, the ones that had made Gary worth building, were mostly worked out by the 1970s. In March of 1982, U.S. Steel cut 500 miners loose in 1 month. By that December, every mine the company ran in Gary was closed for good. By March of 1983, unemployment in Gary had climbed to 90%, the highest rate recorded for any community in the United States at that moment, anywhere in the country. By 1990, just 180 mining jobs were left where thousands had once been. The population spread across what had been 12 towns now sits under 800. The old company office stands dark on its hillside. The satellite towns are being taken back by the forest, and the golf course is somehow still open, running now as the McDowell Country Club. 15,000 people built real lives on this ground, and when the coal was gone, the company was gone too, and it left without a backward glance. Number 1, the Whipple Company store in Fayette County. There's a building here that most people in this state have never laid eyes on. It is huge. It is falling in on itself, and once you understand what it was built to do, from the top floor down to the basement, it will lodge in your mind in a way you are not ready for. The Whipple Company store went up in 1890, and from the road it presents as a large commercial building, but it was never only a store. It was a complete instrument of economic control. Every function of coal camp life folded into one structure and engineered so that every dollar a miner earned traveled straight back to the company. On the main floor, a miner and his family bought their food, their clothing, their medicine, their tools, their furniture, and they bought none of it with cash. The company paid its wages in scrip, a currency it printed for itself, redeemable only at the company store. Those tokens were worth precisely nothing anywhere else on earth, and there was no rival store, no other option, no way out. The company set the value of your labor and then made certain every cent of it circled right back. A floor above, a company doctor kept office hours, his fee lifted out of your pay before you ever touched it, and down in the basement sat a mortuary. When a man was killed underground, and men were killed underground with grim regularity, the same building that had employed him and paid him in tokens and sold him. His supper was also where his body was made ready for the grave. From your first shift at the mine to the day your family carried you out, Whipple had a hand in all of it. The people who lived here understood the terms. Men went below each day with an unflinching sense of what it might cost. Women ran households on whatever scrip was left once the company had taken its cut off the top. Children were raised inside a system built from the ground up to make sure the money never really left the company's hands. It was the coal camp economy stripped to its plainest form, and Whipple was where that economy physically stood. When coal demand fell away through the middle of the 20th century, the store went down with it. The community drained away, and the building was left standing just as it was. Shelves emptied, floors going soft, the basement door pulled shut. It is still there. People make the drive out for the specific purpose of seeing it, and when they stand before it, knowing what took place inside, they feel the piled up weight of one generation after another who fed their families across that main floor and whose husbands and fathers were carried out through the basement. No other single building in West Virginia holds more of what coal country life actually was. That is why it is number 1. West Virginia is full of places like these, communities that were the whole world to the people who lived in them and now sit nearly forgotten. If you know of an abandoned place in this state that deserves a story of its own, leave it in the comments. And if uncovering history like this is worth something to you, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Thanks for watching.